And this is the Holy Gospel according to St. Matthew, the 28th chapter. Glory to you, O Lord. Now the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain to which Jesus had directed them. When they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. And Jesus came and said to them, All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go, therefore, and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything that I have commanded you. And remember, I am with you always, to the end of the age. The Gospel of the Lord. One of the things that I am really missing during this pandemic is the ability to go on a nice, long journey over the summer. But periodically, Facebook reminds me of some of the journeys I've been on in past years. And those are great memories. A lot of my friends on Facebook have also been reposting the pictures of their past trips. And it's great to see and maybe even relive some of the fun and the enjoyment that we've all had. But as I look at my pictures and the things that I posted, I realize that I only post the fun and happy stuff. I don't post the stuff I don't want to remember. So I post the great scenes, the wonderful food, and all the friends that I got to be with. I do not post pictures of me sitting on a plane for hours and hours, or standing in long lines at customs. I do not post about many of the annoyances or the delays, and I don't post about how much all of this is costing me. Those are not the fun parts of the journey, and frankly, I just as soon forget about them and not have Facebook remind me of them a couple of years from now. But journeys, even the journeys we take for fun, involve all of those things. A lot of the journey is just about plugging along in long and boring stretches. There are often difficult and annoying things to endure, and there's a cost. Those things just come with the journey. Today's Gospel reading for Trinity Sunday is appointed because it's the only place in the entire New Testament which mentions the Trinitarian formula exactly as we use it: the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. But Jesus speaks these words as his final instructions to his disciples as he sends them out on a journey. Go is his first word. And this is the big one. All the previous journeys that Jesus sent his disciples on were short trips, maybe the length of our vacations, in which they would return to Jesus, and then the journey would be over. But these words of Jesus in Matthew's Gospel are the first and the final words that the risen Jesus speaks to his disciples after the resurrection. And in these words, he gives them instructions for how they're to live on a journey which will never end. It's the journey of living into a new age as his disciples. And the journey that Jesus sends his first disciples on is also the journey that we are called to, which is really why we read this passage. Because the journey of being a disciple is not a spectator sport for us to watch what other people did way back when, but one to which Jesus calls us also to constant participation. And often, journeys are hard and long, and they require doing things that we never want to post on Facebook. But that's what all important journeys entail. The murder of George Floyd a couple of weeks ago exposes the reality that our country's journey towards equality and racial justice has not progressed as far as many of us had hoped. In some ways, it feels to many like there hasn't been any progress at all on this journey. What are we to do? I do not have any quick or easy answers, and frankly, maybe that's part of the point. Jesus calls us as his disciples to be willing to be involved in long and hard journeys for the long haul, not quick and easy side trips. And that means that we can't just move on to the next thing when the media cycle ends. But I think we can learn some helpful things from the journey that Jesus was sending his disciples on in today's gospel reading. And there are three things that I think it's important to recognize about this journey. Jesus sends his disciples on a journey that included a lot of hard, boring, and frankly not such fun stuff. I mean, surely there were lots of great moments in living as Jesus' disciples in the world, but there was also a lot of danger. There were a lot of long and boring periods where it seemed like nothing was happening and nothing was changing. And for the most part, the journeys of these disciples, they didn't become famous. I mean, we know nothing or almost nothing about what most of these disciples did or where they went. But often, it was by doing the hard, long, and not so exciting stuff that those disciples helped others to actually experience the presence of Jesus. And we know that some of that stuff really did work because others became Christians because of them. And sometimes a journey is only successful because you're willing to put up with some of the stuff that just seems long and hard and frankly sometimes boring. I don't want to sit back and do the research. But in the end, most of the stuff that's really important often ends up not being exciting, and it doesn't show up in our social media feeds. But it's that work that counts. I mean, everybody can get excited about national politics and who wins an election that everybody is paying attention to. But if we're really interested in living as disciples of Jesus who want to change the trajectory of racial injustice, it means we need to do research and ask questions of local and state leaders like, hey, how do we here recruit, train, supervise, discipline police officers in Maryland and Montgomery County? What do we do to ensure a culture in our law enforcement community that treats everybody equally? What's working well? What needs to be changed? How do I best go about lobbying for and supporting that kind of change? I mean, I confess, I do not know the answers to those questions. But finding out and then contacting and working with people who probably are not national celebrities is part of living into the journey of being Jesus' disciples who make God's love and justice a living reality in our own communities. The journey to which Jesus sent his first disciples was absolutely for everybody in the world. But Jesus also told his disciples to pay special attention to those who had been left out. So actually the word nations, when Jesus says, go therefore to all nations, that was a loaded word in first century Judaism because it meant the others, the Gentiles. The people who most of Jesus' first followers would have admitted, yeah, they need to hear the good news too, but please, Jesus, send somebody else. It's actually worse in Luke's gospel reading. You might remember from on Ascension Sunday where Jesus specifically mentions Samaria. Go to the Samaritans, who in the minds of most of Jesus' followers were the worst of the Gentiles. No, they don't like us, we don't like them. Why do we have to pay special attention to them? The point in both of these accounts is that Jesus' love, forgiveness, and mercy really are for everybody. But to make that clear, Jesus' disciples had to ensure that special attention was paid to those who had been left out or those who had been excluded. And that's why Jesus' disciples have always been called to make a special point of sharing God's love and ensuring that God's justice reaches people who have been endangered, left out, and excluded. I mean, every day, even more so now, we see examples of black people in our country who have been excluded, left out, and endangered, and for whom the promise of equal protection under the law has not been fulfilled. And so as disciples of Jesus, we really do need to pay special attention to the lives of those who we know are threatened, marginalized, or endangered. Paying special attention to those who need it most is part of the program of being on this journey of Jesus' disciples. and that first journey, that lifelong journey that Jesus sent his first disciples on, required Jesus' disciples to model Jesus' behavior in their own lives each day. Jesus says, make disciples. Not just fill people's heads with doctrine or enforce some kind of moral code. Teach people to live as God's children, and you can't do that unless you do it yourself. You have to model it in your life. Jesus' first disciples, I think, understood that. And in the end, the behavior we should expect from our elected leaders and our public servants needs to be modeled by each one of us. Discipleship just has to mean more than posting righteous indignation on social media about the way others have acted. Discipleship means that each one of us needs to act differently each day. And acting differently means not just what we do, but the words we use when we speak to others and about others. And it's also about the attitudes we convey. It's still going to be a long, hard journey from here. But I'm actually encouraged by some of the signs of hope that I don't think I've really seen before, including the fact that lots of white people are marching with black people to demand change. I mean, that's something sort of new. Most of the time when unfortunately incidents where people have been treated badly happen, it's minority communities with a few white people. Now it looks more like a rainbow coalition of everybody. And that's going to be important if we're actually going to affect change. But I see that happening, and I was talking to the executive committee earlier this week, and I said, I live in a community which is pretty diverse. Without going outside the houses that touch my property or across the street from it, I have white neighbors, black neighbors, Asian neighbors. That's the way our whole community is. And a few days ago, there were a bunch of people in our community that decided they wanted to hold some protest signs outside to support racial justice on the street. And Blake and I saw them as we were taking our walk. And I thought, one of the really good signs about this is that even though we have this hugely diverse community, all the people who stood up and said, we need to take racial justice seriously, they were all white people. And that's a good sign, because it's not going to happen without white people helping out. And that's something I need to remember as well. I also see as a sign of hope that police officers are often joining the protesters, taking a knee, hugging people, showing that they understand the frustrations and the problems caused by people who are misrepresenting who the vast majority of police officers are. And I totally get that, because as a member of the clergy, oftentimes the only clergy members who make the news are people who have done horrible, terrible things. And people look at that and go, this must be the way that all clergy are. And it's not. But it often takes those of us who are clergy at those moments to say, no, and we're going to enact policies to make sure that none of us are in situations that we could cause that kind of situation, to actually affect change. And many police officers are doing this also. I think that's a sign of hope. And the other sign of hope I see is that local leaders of both parties seem to be taking this more seriously as an issue. And I think it's a moment, and I think all of us need to participate in that moment, because I think that's a great sign of hope. But in the end, the best sign of hope is this final promise of Jesus in today's reading. I am with you always, even to the end of the age. That is, to the end of all of our journeys and beyond. See, these are not the words of someone sending his disciples out on a fun vacation. They're words of promise for people who have tough work ahead of them and a long ways to go. Jesus calls us to a journey of discipleship, but he doesn't ask us to go alone. He promises to be with us always, to strengthen us, to give us stamina when the journey just seems too long, and sometimes to push us along when we think we're stuck in the hard or the boring parts of it. But the journey of discipleship makes us part of God's work in the world. It gives us the opportunity to make Jesus real and visible in the lives of others. And that journey is worth it. So let's keep up on the journey. Amen.